Welcome to Political Fallout Shelter, the best podcast in America, coming to you from the basement of the Capitol dealing with defense issues. I am Leo Shane, Deputy Editor of Military Times. Thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in. Please remember to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes and Google Play and tell your friends about it. If we don't get some more listeners soon, we're not going to be able to keep Joe on anymore, and I know he's very upset about that. So, with me, as always, the appropriations measure to my authorization bill, Joe Gould, Capitol Hill Bureau Chief for Defense News. Joe, how you doing this week?
Whoop whoop.
Hey, listen, a lot of news coming out of the White House this week dealing with the military. We're still dealing with some of the North Korea fallout, what that means, where things go. But by far the one that got the most buzz in the defense community, immigration was the larger community, but was this idea of Space Force. Sixth military branch. This has been talked about before, but President Trump just said, we're doing it. I'm gonna sign some executive orders, and we are moving ahead. What does this mean, Joe?
I mean, what does it mean, Joe? That is the question. We don't know what it means. The president said that he wanted to create a separate but equal branch of the military, but beyond that, we really don't know what the details are going to be. I think he's going to leave that up to the Pentagon, which he's directed to sort this all out. I think immediately there were a number of articles out there explaining that Congress is going to be needed to actually authorize this, to
find money for this. This is going
to find money for
any new department, any new military initiative is going to cost money.
So I mean, it's really a big. I think there's a huge question mark here. What's the Pentagon going to do here? A year ago, Air Force Secretary Heather Wilson opposed this. Jim Mattis opposed this because what it would take is carving space out of the Air Force, most likely. Right.
And this is one of the points I wanted to bring up. I mean, we're not that far away from the Pentagon saying absolutely not. This is a terrible idea. This was an idea that was floated up here in Congress. And the Pentagon came back and said, no, look, we'll do some tweaks to the Air Force. We can understand some of your frustration with how programs go, but we don't want to do something crazy like create an entire new military branch. And now a year later, we've got the president saying, let's create an entirely new military branch. Let's have a sixth branch.
So one thing that we didn't get from the president was like an actual justification for why we need a Space Force. And just to lay it out, there is an argument for a Space Force. Mike Rogers, the chairman of the Strategic Forces subcommittee, he's from Alabama, which has a lot of space rockets going. That's where a lot of that stuff is focused. His argument is that that the Air Force has ignored space in favor of its core mission. The idea is that the nerve center for the U.S. military is actually in space. The communications backbone is in space, and and satellites are vulnerable to Chinese and Russian technologies that are being developed. We don't really know all the details because it's classified. So we need to. So the president has talked about space dominance. I guess the thought is to be able to defend our satellites, maybe even develop our own satellite killing technology. I don't know. But the flip side of that argument, the opposition has been that this is duplicative, that this already exists. We don't need to create more bureaucracy. And by the way, last year, and these arguments played out last year when the House Defense Policy Bill contained a provision championed by Mike Rogers to build a Space Corps. The Senate bill didn't have that,
right?
And so in the conference process, it was vanished. It was stripped from the final bill.
Well, and now we're hearing that Senator Inhofe, who's been acting as the lead on armed services in the absence of John McCain, is saying that he's not necessarily sold on this idea.
He's not convinced. There's bipartisan in the Senate. There is first of all, the House Armed Services Committee is not unanimous on this issue. Mike Turner, who's the chairman of the Air Land Subcommittee, is not in favor. His counterpart on the Senate Armed Services Committee, Tom Cotton, last year authored an amendment to not fund a Space Corps with Bill Nelson, who is a Democrat from Florida. The counterpart for Jim Inhofe, Deb Fisher, Republican from Nebraska, she's also opposed to Space Corps. So there is an array of opposition to this idea, and it will be interesting to see how it plays out. It's not in the bill this year. There's nothing in the bill this year.
Well, and it's worth noting that with the executive orders the president signed, there's nothing in there really that delineates any of this either. So,
Right.
So we're probably not getting Space Marines in the near future.
And by the way, I misspoke. There is some language in the space. There is some language this year, and last year a study was ordered, and that study is due in August. So I think opponents are saying, like, hey, the president jumped the gun here.
Yeah.
We don't even have a study justifying the Space Corps, and won't until August. And now he's asking for something that, without a rationale.
Yeah, very unusual for the White House to jump the gun and lay things out maybe a little early. So, since we started talking about defense authorization bill, let me pivot to that because there's some news this week on that as well. The Senate passed their version. This is the big defense budget policy bill that manages to get through every year. We're looking at this will be the 58th consecutive year that this passes when it gets through. But you and I have been talking to a lot of lawmakers who say that this process, which usually takes all through the fall, they think they can get it done this summer, which would be just crazy in terms of timing. And it's been 10 years since they got it done before the start of the fiscal year. I went back in our files and I can't find the last time they actually got it done in the summer. So how likely do you think it is that we could see this bill that so much of next year's defense planning rests on? How likely is it that we could get it done in the next few weeks?
Well, I think you already said the answer, which is that the chances are slim. If you look at the track record, I think I would bet with in favor of the record here. But as you say, the leadership of the committee has said that or of the committees has said that they're going to get started in conference next week.
Yeah.
They want to get it done before August. So yes, they have said that the will is there.
Look, I've covered this long enough to know that every year they say they're going to get it done by August, and most years I just blow it off and I laugh, and then I start preparing for when they're going to eventually pass it around Thanksgiving. But here's why I think this year is different. It's an election year, which always puts a little bit more emphasis on getting work done, so you can get back and talk to constituents, but this year's defense authorization bill is noticeably absent of a lot of controversy. There's usually at least a few things that seem like they're going to be major sticking points, major dig-in fights. We've got a top-line agreement already. This is going to be a $716 billion defense authorization bill. We have some personnel issues, we have some differences in equipment, but we don't have anything that really is a gigantic fight that should hold this up. So if they really are motivated, we've heard Mac Thornberry say he wants to move on to appropriations. He wants to get this off the board so that no one in his chamber has an excuse for delaying the larger budget conversation. I guess they could if they really want to push this. Maybe the end of July is realistic.
Well, I would say that there are a couple of sticking points. You're going
to talk about sage-grouse again.
Well, actually, I wasn't going to talk about sage-grouse this time. I was going to talk about ZTE, which is the Chinese, mega telecom firm. National security officials and others are suspicious of this firm. It has ties to the Chinese government. That this Chinese telecom company could somehow build a backdoor in to conduct surveillance, that security could be compromised, and so they were barred from doing business with American companies, not for those issues, but because they were found to be doing business with Iran, and the administration struck a deal where they would pay, I think, in excess of like $1 billion in fines, and then they would be able to work with American firms again. Well, that's not enough for some lawmakers who want to continue a ban on ZTE and another company, Huawei,
Okay.
and that made it into the Senate NDAA. There isn't it's handled differently in the House bill. I think the House bill bars the Defense Department from
Right.
from entering into
But
contracts with ZTE.
this could be one of the issues that does slow things down. This could
Well,
end up being a pretty good fight that takes July, August out of the picture.
yeah, I mean it's the Trump administration that cut this deal with the Chinese to allow this to continue. So what do you do? Does Congress kind of, on the one hand, does it defend the president's ability to negotiate trade deals or negotiate trade, or does it stand up for the national security concern? And I think it's one of those things that divides Republicans. Democrats probably side with.
Okay. All right, so we've got ZTE as a potential problem there.
Right. Thank you.
There's a difference between the end strengths in these two bills, so
Right.
they'll have to reconcile that. There's some officer promotion changes that the Senate has. The House has said we want to study this a little further. Maybe that's a fight. What else do we got? A couple of equipment purchases, but not
Right.
anything too major.
Yeah, I think fewer F-35s in the one of the issues is fewer F-35s
But there's
in
nothing-
the
There's nothing on that list that is something like "don't ask, don't tell," which is one of the things
Right.
that's held this up in the past. There's no fight over the top line. There's nothing that seems insurmountable. So
Well, that's definitely what that is working in favor of a deal, is that there isn't a top line fight to deal
so
with.
what kind of odds do I have to give you to put money on the other side?
I don't
10
think
to
so.
1?
I'm
15 to 1?
Look, we've talked about this before. When you're betting on Congress to be slow and inactive, I mean, go with the record.
Yeah, go absolutely. So, listen, I've referenced it earlier. These have been the big issues in the defense sphere for us this week, but obviously the big story nationally has been this immigration issue, the issue of migrant children being separated from their families. A lot of emotions here, a lot of frankly disturbing stories that we're hearing on this. One that I know the Defense Department had hoped to stay away from completely, and it doesn't appear they're going to be successful in that. This is yet another issue that becomes a military national security issue because they're being drug in. We got a report just yesterday that the Defense Department is preparing to house up to 20,000 migrant children at a couple different bases, a couple different locations. Still a lot of details to be figured out on that. I talked to Chairman Thornberry on the House Armed Services Committee. He said he still doesn't know exactly what that means and where this is going to be. But this is yet another scandal, controversy issue that I know DOD wishes they weren't part of, but now they're in the center of.
Yeah, I mean, one impression that you get from the Defense Secretary is that he wants to be engaged in sort of the core functions of the Defense Department, and this is arguably not one of them. Just like you, I talked to a senior member of the Armed Services Committee, Rob Whitman, and he said that they're still working out between the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Defense the logistics of how this might work. He anticipated that that DoD would be taking existing facilities and retrofitting them to accommodate 20,000 people. It isn't entirely clear to me whether we're talking about 20,000 children or whether this is, in service of reuniting these immigrant children with their parents, as the president's executive order dictates, that this would be 20,000 people in families. So
we also heard a report that the White House is looking at using military JAGs, using legal officers to help with some of the adjudication of these cases. I mean, look, it wasn't that long ago that we were talking about how exhausted the military was with this state building, State Department kind of functions overseas, and now we're talking about even more mission creep, even more just issues that are suddenly in the Pentagon's lap that they really don't want to be part of.
Well, I think there was something in the 2017 NDAA. A congressional aide kind of put a bug in my ear that there's something in the 2017 NDAA that bars this kind of thing if it's going to impact military readiness in any way. So, we'll see how this plays out.
But that almost requires the DoD to confront the administration and to fight
Right.
with them, which is something that Mattis absolutely
Or-
has bent over backwards to make sure that to show that he's not in
Right.
conflict. So.
Yeah, with the administration. I mean, who knows what goes on behind the scenes? Or I'm sorry, what the provision is that Mattis would have to certify that this doesn't impact readiness at all. So
Yeah. But again, the impetus is, if Mattis doesn't want to be part of this, he's going to have to go to war with the White House, which is
Right.
certainly not something we've seen. So
yeah, I think with Democrats sort of on the other side of this policy, they're going to be looking for flaws in it. And one thing though that I do want to note just before we move on is that there had been some Twitter traffic I'd been seeing about DOD money being used for this purpose, and part of the executive order says that the Department of Homeland Security is going to have to reimburse DOD. How that exactly I'm curious about how that would actually function. Is DOD floating money to DHS until they're reimbursed? I don't know.
Yeah, does that mean paying rent? Does that mean paying for retrofit? There's a lot of questions there, and a lot for the committees up here to keep an eye on in the weeks to come. So.
Yeah, and watch Defense News and Military Times. I think definitely we're going to
I think we'll
trying
be
to track down the answers to these questions.
All right, look, to end on a little bit of a lighter note, I've got a list of topics we're supposed to talk about here, and I've got Space Force again, and I thought we had exhausted every Space Force meme this week, every joke about the uniforms, every joke about the rank structure, every joke about installing Darth Vader as various in various official capacities. Why? What do you think we have not covered?
Oh,
on this yet?
it's the the Army goes rolling along. All of the services have their own anthems. What is going to be Space Force's anthem? And I think I've arrived at it.
I cannot wait.
Space Force, nothing but Space Force. I really didn't think about this any
Every time I
further.
hear Space Force, I hear the Spaceballs song. I'm not hearing the Star Wars song.
Okay,
so
belt it out.
I am not singing. That was not part of the agreement with this. This is not. You're right. The Space Marines are going to need their anthem, and
right.
We should probably look into that.
What did you think? What's your argument on the rank structure? Where do you fall on this?
It feels like it's got to be the Navy rank structure, right?
I'm on Team Navy.
But is that just because we've watched too much Star Trek in our life, or is there really a rationale for this?
Well, yes.
Okay.
That's a good enough rationale.
Well, look, I'm sure we can get into this. I'm sure we can have a good breakdown on the promotion structure, the rank structure. I'm very interested in space GI Bill benefits when that comes up. We will be tracking all of this at militarytimes.com and defensenews.com. You can follow us all week long on Twitter, too. I'm at Leo Shane.
I'm at Reporter Joe.
Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week.